He tries to speak with strength, but every pause reveals a man fighting a battle far heavier than the world ever imagined. And the quiet way his family now gathers around him has started a wave of concern that refuses to fade. At 64, the emotional moments unfolding behind closed doors have left fans feeling a chilling mix of heartbreak and fear, because what his loved ones are doing now hints at a truth far more serious than anyone was prepared to face. Michael J. Fox's story begins long before fame ever found him, in a childhood marked by constant uprooting, emotional uncertainty, and the pressure to adapt faster than most kids his age could comprehend. Growing up in a military family meant that just when he started to feel settled, life would shift again: new cities, new schools, new faces, and the silent challenge of proving himself from scratch every time. But instead of breaking him, these early storms forged the tools he would rely on for the rest of his life. He learned to read people quickly, to sense a room, to understand what made others comfortable, and humor became his shield, his bridge, and his anchor. Every laugh he earned wasn't just a joke, landed it was a way of carving out a place for himself in a world that refused to stay still. Adaptability became second nature, a quiet strength that would later become essential when life tested him in ways no child could imagine. When the family finally settled in Burnaby, he dared to dream like every Canadian kid does, chasing hockey with fierce passion until reality reminded him of the limits of his size. Losing that dream hurt, not because of the sport itself, but because it felt like watching a piece of his identity fall apart. Yet in that loss, a new path quietly opened. Music pulled him in first, but acting, almost stumbled upon by accident, ignited a fire he never knew he carried. His timing, sharpened by years of using humor to survive, became a natural gift on stage. The confidence he built from navigating unfamiliar worlds became the foundation of his craft. What could have been a childhood of instability instead became the blueprint for resilience. Those early years carved the mindset he would one day depend on when fame arrived too quickly, when expectations grew heavier than applause, and when life itself would confront him with challenges far more devastating than a lost dream. His rise in Hollywood wasn't the smooth arc of a destined superstar. It was the journey of someone shaped by upheaval, strengthened by loss, and unknowingly preparing for battles that would define him forever. Michael J. Fox's rise happened because he trusted his instincts even when everything around him said he didn't belong. Pushing through every barrier with a determination that refused to break. He had no money, no connections, and no guarantees. But he showed up to every audition with raw drive and a sense of timing that casting directors couldn't ignore. Small early roles in films like Midnight Madness and Class of 1984 weren't careered, but they revealed something rare: an actor who wasn't a conventional leading man yet carried a spark that made audiences look twice. That spark ignited the moment he stepped into the audition room for Family Ties. The show wasn't built for him. He wasn't the network's first choice, and executives doubted he had the look or presence to become iconic. Yet the moment he appeared on screen, he reshaped the entire direction of the series. His wit, energy, and effortless charm transformed Alex into a cultural phenomenon, proving wrong every doubt that had been placed on him. Years later, when he sent a custom lunchbox to the NBC president who once dismissed him, it wasn't an act of revenge, it was a symbol of triumph earned through resilience. That triumph exploded into something even bigger when he was finally brought in for Back to the Future. Juggling 2 productions at once, he moved between sets with barely any sleep, living on adrenaline and belief in a film he felt destined to be part of. He pushed his body to its limit without realizing those long nights were quietly revealing the first plus signs of a storm he didn't yet know was coming. When the movie was released, he became the face of a generation, carrying the kind of warmth and energy that made audiences feel alive. But as the world celebrated him, his body began sending signals he didn't want to acknowledge: a tremor here, a persistent twitch. They're small, unsettling clues that something deeper was wrong. At first he blamed exhaustion, convinced it was nothing more than the cost of success. But the symptoms grew stronger, appearing at moments he couldn't hide or control. Fear settled in long before he dared to speak it aloud. When the medical tests finally delivered the truth, it arrived like a blow he couldn't prepare for. At only 29, in the prime of his life and career, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a reality that shattered every assumption he had about his future and forced him into a battle far more daunting than anything fame had ever demanded of him. Hearing the diagnosis shattered him, not only because Parkinson's was known as an illness that struck much older adults, but because he was still in his 20s, full of momentum, success, and dreams that suddenly felt out of reach. Walking out of the doctor's office, he later admitted he had no idea how to face a future that had just been rewritten in a single sentence. There was no cure, no clear timeline, only the certainty that the symptoms would grow stronger and that the life he imagined was slipping away before he even had the chance to live it. The hardest moment came when he had to tell his wife, Tracy Pollan. They were newly married, still building a future, still believing in a long road ahead, and he feared burdening her with something so heavy. But when he told her, they cried together once, and only once. After that, they made a quiet promise to face everything side by side, and her strength became the anchor that kept him from collapsing under the weight of reality. Despite her support, he couldn't bring himself to reveal the truth to the rest of the world. For 7 long years he kept his diagnosis secret from Hollywood while continuing to work non-stop. He memorized lines, delivered performances, and made millions laugh, all while privately battling tremors and symptoms that grew harder to hide. Medications became his lifeline, carefully timed around filming so he could appear steady on screen. The effort was draining emotionally, physically, mentally, but he refused to let anyone see weakness or question his ability to work. In public he remained the energetic, charming star people adored. In private, he endured nights filled with worry, fear, and the crushing pressure of pretending to be fine. The double life pushed him toward a breaking point, a moment when denial and exhaustion collided and forced him to confront the truth he had been running from. That breaking point came through alcohol. Fear and uncertainty drove him back to old habits he thought he had left behind. Before marriage, his life had been wild late nights, heavy drinking, and constant partying. Marriage and fatherhood had steadied him, but Parkinson's reopened a door he thought was closed forever. Alcohol became a way to escape the reality he wasn't ready to face, numbing the fear and giving him temporary distance from a future he didn't know how to accept. But the more he drank, the further he drifted from the man he wanted to be. The moment that changed everything came one night in 1992. After drinking heavily, he passed out on the couch. When he woke up, he didn't find anger, he found Tracy standing quietly, disappointment written across her face. She didn't yell or accuse. She simply asked, "Is this what you want? Is this who you want to be?" Those words cut deeper than any confrontation. In that single moment, he saw the truth of what he was becoming: a husband and father disappearing behind a bottle, a man letting fear control him instead of fighting back. It was the moment he realized that continuing down that path meant losing far more than his health. It meant losing himself. He knew that if he didn't change, he would lose everything: his family, his identity, and any chance of facing his illness with the dignity and strength it demanded. The disease wasn't his choice, but the way he responded to it still was. And that realization pushed him toward a decision that would alter the course of his life. The very next day, he quit drinking. It wasn't a dramatic transformation or an instant victory. It was the beginning of a long, difficult process of rebuilding himself, one honest step at a time. Therapy became the place where he finally confronted the fear, grief, and anger he had buried for years. Instead of letting denial control him, he began learning how to live with reality, how to ask for help, how to communicate openly with Tracy and their children, how to face the truth without collapsing under it. Sobriety didn't just give him clarity, it rebuilt the foundation he had been slowly eroding. Choosing sobriety wasn't simply about giving up alcohol. It was about choosing to live, to stay present, and to meet his illness with courage instead of avoidance. And as he began to accept Parkinson's instead of running from it, something inside him shifted. His pain slowly transformed into purpose that would reach far beyond his own life. The foundation quickly became a global leader in Parkinson's research, bringing together scientists, doctors, and patients with unprecedented focus and unity. Through this work, Michael found a new sense of direction. Instead of dwelling on what the disease had taken from him, he channeled his energy into what he could give back, speaking openly about his daily struggles, raising awareness, and fighting for advancements in science gave him a purpose that replaced the despair of his earlier years. It didn't erase the challenges he faced, the tremors, the exhaustion, the unpredictability of his body, but it gave those challenges meaning. And as he stepped deeper into advocacy, the physical toll of Parkinson's continued to intensify. What the public often saw, his smile, his humor, his steady presence, was only a small glimpse of the battle happening inside him every single day, behind the scenes. Every movement Michael J. Fox makes is held together by a precise schedule of medication, the only thing that allows him to walk, speak, and interact with the world. Parkinson's strips the brain of dopamine, the chemical that controls motion. And for Michael, that means the difference between mobility and total paralysis can come down to whether he takes his pills at the exact right moment. When the medication is active, he can talk clearly and move with some control. When it fades, his body stiffens, tremors take over, and even the simplest actions become impossible. He once explained that without medication he would be stone-faced, silent, and frozen in place at reality he confronts every day, even in moments when the public sees him smiling or speaking with confidence. In 1998, as his symptoms worsened, he made the difficult decision to undergo a thalamotomy, a brain surgery meant to reduce the violent tremors that were overtaking his life. The procedure carried serious risks, including speech problems and balance issues, but he chose it because the tremors had made ordinary tasks unbearable. The surgery offered partial relief, enough to give him some stability during a time when he was losing control piece by piece. But nothing could stop the disease from progressing. Over the years, the tremors intensified, his muscles stiffened, and his once bright voice began to weaken. Memory, a skill that once made acting effortless, also began to slip away, turning line memorization into a daily battle. Each new symptom forced him to adapt, to find new ways to communicate, and to accept that the illness was slowly reshaping every corner of his life. By the late 1990s, he was living in two worlds at once. On screen, he was the confident, quick-witted star of Spin City, carrying a hit show with the same charm that had defined his career. Off-screen, Parkinson's was tightening its grip, making long shooting days and constant movement nearly impossible. By 2000, after completing his 100th episode, the strain became too overwhelming. He announced he was stepping away from the series, his first real retirement from acting. It wasn't about fading from the spotlight, it was about survival. Leaving Spin City gave him space to focus on his family, his foundation, and on managing the disease in a way that didn't break his body even further. For many, this might have been the end of a career, but for him, it was simply a shift. Over the next decade, he rebuilt his connection to acting on his own terms. He wrote, advocated, and slowly returned to television in smaller, carefully chosen roles that worked with his condition instead of against it. Appearing in shows like Scrubs, Boston Legal, Rescue Me, and The Good Wife, he reminded audiences that even as Parkinson's reshaped his body, it could not take away his talent, his spirit, or the passion that had made him a legend. These later roles were crafted to include his Parkinson's symptoms, allowing him to perform without hiding what his body was going through. And each appearance became a quiet personal triumph. They proved that even as the disease tightened its hold, he was still sharp, still capable, and still able to move audiences with the same authenticity that defined his career. For him, acting during this period wasn't about clinging to fame, it was about showing the world that a person living with a serious illness could still create meaningful, powerful work. In 2013, he took an even bolder step with The Michael J. Fox Show, a sitcom inspired by his own life. It was a daring blend of humor and vulnerability, giving viewers an honest look at what it meant to live with Parkinson's. And even though the show didn't last long, it reflected his fierce commitment to transparency and his refusal to let the disease silence him. By 2019, however, the progression of Parkinson's had made acting far more difficult. His short-term memory had weakened, making it hard to memorize lines, and his once bright voice had grown unpredictable. Some days he could speak smoothly, other days he struggled to form words. The realization forced him into another difficult decision, stepping away from acting entirely. It wasn't a loss of hope, but a recognition that he could no longer perform at the standard he held for himself. As the spotlight dimmed, the role of his family became even more profound, forming the foundation that carried him through his most challenging years. In 2006, Michael faced a very different test, one that had nothing to do with Hollywood. By then, he had become one of the most respected voices advocating for Parkinson's research, using his platform to fight for progress that could change millions of lives. When he appeared in a political ad supporting a candidate who backed stem cell research, he chose to show the truth of his condition without filters or acting. The ad was raw, honest, and deeply human. His body moved uncontrollably as he spoke, not because he wanted sympathy, but because that was the unvarnished reality of Parkinson's. The reaction was immediate, powerful, and divided. Conservative radio host Rush Limbaugh accused him of exaggerating his symptoms, even suggesting he purposely skipped his medication to appear worse. The comments shocked and angered people around the world, especially those who understood the brutal complexities of Parkinson's. For Michael and his family, the accusations were cruel not only because they questioned his honesty, but because they mocked a condition he had spent years bravely revealing. Michael refused to respond with bitterness. Instead, he explained the truth with calm, steady clarity. He hadn't skipped medication. He had taken more than usual, which resulted in dyskinesia-controlled movements caused by the medication itself. He made it clear that Parkinson's was relentless without medication, but even the treatment carried its own heavy cost. There was no moment where he looked normal, no version of the disease that could be staged for effect. His honesty exposed how misunderstood Parkinson's truly is. People learned that symptoms fluctuate, medications can both help and harm, and there is no perfect control. His explanation educated millions and quietly dismantled a stigma that had followed the illness for decades. But while public debates eventually faded, the private battle never did. At home, his family remained his lifeline, guiding him through the unpredictable, exhausting, and deeply emotional journey of facing Parkinson's in its later stages. One of the greatest sources of strength in Michael J. Fox's life has always been his family, with his wife Tracy Pollan at the heart of it all. They met on the set of Family Ties, fell in love, and built a partnership rooted in trust, honesty, and unwavering loyalty. When Michael was diagnosed with Parkinson's at just 29, Tracy became the quiet force that held everything together. He often says, "She has a no-drama kind of strength. She doesn't panic, doesn't collapse under pressure, and never steps back when things get hard. Instead, she focuses on the next step, the practical solution, the way forward." That calm, grounded presence helped steady him during the terrifying early years of his diagnosis, and she continued to stand beside him through every progression of the disease, supporting him without letting Parkinson's define who they were as a couple. Together they raised 4 children. The twins, Aquina and Skylar, and their youngest, Esme, the kids grew up with a father who was both a global star and a man living with a complex neurological condition. They watched him shine on red carpets and television sets, but they also watched him struggle simply to walk across a room or button a shirt. For them, Parkinson's wasn't a secret or a shadow hanging over the family, it was just part of life. Michael and Tracy made sure their children understood the illness honestly, without fear or confusion, creating an environment where open conversations were normal and compassion was instinctive. That openness helped the children feel safe even when their father's symptoms changed. Unexpectedly, humor became the connective tissue of their home. Michael's quick wit and playful spirit helped soften difficult moments, turning heavy days into something bearable and reminding everyone that even in the midst of struggle, there could still be joy. The family supported one another through constant communication, shared responsibilities, and a willingness to step in wherever help was needed. These habits formed a foundation strong enough to hold the weight of everything Michael faced, giving him the emotional stability to keep going even as the disease grew more challenging. Their bond didn't erase the pain, but it gave it purpose, turning hardship into unity and fear into resilience. And in the end, that love, the quiet, powerful, everyday kind, became the force that carried him through the darkest moments and reminded him that he never had to fight alone.